Hello again and welcome to today's Beyond Oil conversation, where in a moment we're going to be discussing Australia's nuclear option. Before I introduce my guest though, I wanted to remind you that for a limited time you can get a free ticket to our online conference, also called Beyond Oil. All the details, including dates, times and speakers, are on this page, so scroll down and have a look. And if you want to join us for free, just pop your email address in the box below this video and click or tap the button. I'm really looking forward to the show. It's been the most ambitious online project we've ever undertaken. But as you're learning, the time to move on this is now. Governments all over the world are talking up the big green recovery post-COVID, and many are putting their money where their mouths are. Private capital is also starting to mobilize, with investors, including many institutions, pulling out of fossil fuel stocks and into greener alternatives. Anyway, you'll get our best ideas on how to position your capital at our Beyond Oil online conference. As I said, all the details are below. So again, scroll down, take a look, and don't forget to grab your free ticket. Right, today we're going to talk about the elephant in the room, nuclear power. Now, nuclear doesn't really get a look in when people talk about clean energy. It's definitely an unfashionable option. But should we really dismiss it? Especially when you consider Australia's vast uranium resources. Well, helping me unpick this thorny subject are Shae Russell from the Daily Reckoning, Rockstock Insider and Hard Money Trader, and Lachlann Tierney from Money Morning and Exponential Stock Investor. Welcome both.
Hi, Woody.
Now, I think the safety concerns around nuclear power have been pretty well documented, but I wanted to ask you guys whether you think the perceived risk of nuclear power is actually hampering Australia from achieving energy independence. Who's going to go first?
Look, I'll jump in, Woody. So, look, it's like the fear of flying, really. If you look at a statistical breakdown of the deaths that have resulted from nuclear energy compared to, say, coal or even hydro, it's actually one of the safest forms of electricity available. It's just that, I mean, we learned with Chernobyl, for example, that you need to have a containment facility around the reactor. And on top of that, you need to stop tinkering with settings. And Fukushima, we learned not to build near a fault line or a tsunami zone. But those two disasters are sort of latched onto by the media, and it sort of spirals into this situation where people think it's very dangerous, even when statistically it's not that dangerous. So that's my view on the matter. And I think this resistance to nuclear will continue. I don't mean to be too much of a downer, but it is definitely a factor in the political will necessary to make this happen.
What do you reckon, Shae?
Look, I actually do agree with Lockie. There is a perceived safety risk that isn't really there with nuclear. However, I do just want to touch on what he pointed out with Japan about how we learnt not to build near fault lines or tsunami lines. Now, where the Fukushima reactor was actually built, the epicenter of the earthquake that destroyed or that caused that nuclear meltdown was actually not known to have major earthquakes. So the site was actually built according to the earthquake code. It's only recently this year that they released a scientific paper to say in that area is known to have once in 1,000-year earthquakes of a magnitude of 9. So we really learned from that event to essentially never underestimate Mother Nature, but also it just goes to show how our understanding of geophysics continues to change. But around the perceived safety of nuclear, a lot of things that hold it back are nuclear waste, for example. There's this concern that, we're going to end up with the three-eyed fish swimming in our rivers. High-level radioactive waste is actually a very small output of nuclear energy because it's so small. It's about 5 grams per person per year. So it's actually not as big as we think, and this is because of how energy efficient nuclear energy really is. I think a lot of the public objection focuses on this perceived safety risk of nuclear power has a lot to do with corporate social responsibility. Now, corporates have failed us many, many times in the past. We've had 3 major nuclear meltdowns that the public know about, but the problem is there's actually been smaller ones along the way that have been covered up. So people hear about that, and that sort of locks in their mind and enhances these risks that aren't really there with nuclear power. But as corporates, go some way to ensuring their responsibility for the community and the environment, I think that might help change the argument.
So do you think that's going to play a big part into, so my next question is really going to be, what does the nuclear industry have to do to convince politicians, homeowners, investors, or whatever, that nuclear power is a viable option? That kind of leads into that answer, doesn't it?
Well,
Yeah, look,
just better PR, really. I mean, it's a PR relationship that needs to be developed over time, and the nuclear industry, they do everything in their power, but it's certainly not been a major talking point until recently, the nuclear issue.
Yeah, I agree with Lachie. PR is a major thing that needs to be done. Just to put some statistics around it, there's only been 3 major meltdowns out of the 440 nuclear reactors that are operational around the world. One of the things that I think politicians and corporations need to do is come up with a public approved long-term safety plan on the very, very rare chance that something goes wrong. So as I mentioned, there's been 3 major meltdowns. The one that happened in England in 1957 has only just finished effectively being cleaned up, but even then they've admitted that they can't put the fire out anymore. The Chernobyl disaster is effectively had a Band-Aid put on it. They put a dome on it that they said is going to last for the next 100 years. And Fukushima, they've openly admitted that they can't contain the damage that's been done in this century. So we're not talking the 20th century, we're talking this century. So that stays in people's minds. That's what they hear when they're talking about nuclear power. So any corporation and any politician in Australia is going to need to present the argument of, okay, disasters are statistically infrequent, but here is our long-term, century long-term plan if the worst case scenario is going to happen.
There's been lots of talk about Germany's switch over to renewable energy in the form of wind and solar, but France's, for example, their power grid has had a sizable and safe nuclear component for years. Could that happen in Australia?
Well, on this topic, Woody, I'd just say that in addition to being able to convince the citizens and the population, you also need to address the issue of capital intensiveness, which basically means it takes a lot of money to get a nuclear power plant up and running. So this means that, a 1,000 megawatt reactor, a large one, the price point is anywhere from 6 billion to 10 billion US, which sounds like a lot, but that's where the issue becomes really interesting, is that Bill Gates, through his TerraPower company, is pursuing SMRs, which are small modular reactors. And those reactors are about 345 megawatts, and they come in at a price point of $1 billion. So that's sort of what is necessary to address, I guess, the capital expenditure needed to get these up and running. And so I really think if this is going to happen, it's going to start in the US and it's going to take a big tech push. And that's just what will need to happen before Australia even considers this proposed option.
Yeah, again, Lockie's got a great point, but also too, in Australia, we're up against vested interests. Our fossil fuel companies are big donors to our political parties. I think the gas and oil companies donated something like a combined $50 million to the coalition, or sorry, they received 80% of that $50 million donated to the coalition. So basically, Australia is very much dominated by fossil fuels, and they've got the ear of the politicians. So not only are we up against the perceived safety risks, but we've got other companies that are keeping our politicians only looking in one direction before they even consider some of the points that Lockie's pointed out.
Yeah, right. Well, let's switch the conversation towards the mining side of things. Obviously, a huge component in creating nuclear power is uranium, and we have a lot of uranium here in Australia. What's the domestic mining industry looking at the moment? Where are our biggest deposits? What's the spot price doing? Is there an appetite for pulling uranium out of the ground? Maybe I'll start with Shae. I mean, you've been pretty close to the Aussie mining story, more in gold terms, but you're pretty across it all. So let's start with you.
Look, uranium is a growing source of energy that I don't think Australians can be ignorant of, regardless of some of the cases against it that Lachie and I have just mentioned. Australia, not only are we gold rich, but we're uranium rich. We could actually be energy independent. So the Olympic Dam mine, for example, has enough uranium to give Australia, meet our current electrical needs for the next 150 years. Now that's one known mine, and because very little discovery has been done on uranium in Australia since the 70s, it actually could be even bigger than that. Just to put it in perspective, all of the uranium that comes out of Olympic Dam, for example, is actually sold to friendly parties overseas. So we don't use it for energy here, and we also don't enrich the uranium here as well. But it's worth pointing out that Australia is so uranium rich that we have as much uranium as the next 4 biggest stakeholders of it. So we really could end our reliance on fossil fuels by exploiting uranium deposits. But more to the point too, one of the advantages that, and again, I'll rely on the Olympic Dam mine here because it is the major supplier of uranium in Australia, is it has economically recoverable reserves that when the spot price is under $40 per pound. And that's what we're seeing right now. The uranium price is, or in US dollar terms, I should say, is around the $30 per pound price. Now, the Olympic Dam mine is pretty much the only one that can extract uranium and sell overseas under that price. It's economical there. Right. Worldwide mines have actually been put in care and maintenance mode because it's not economical at that. So, so Australia is in a great position to take advantage of the low uranium prices from right now.
But do they have the support though? I mean, do they have the support for the infrastructure? I mean, wasn't there was a recent attempt in New South Wales to overturn the ban on uranium mining? That was unsuccessful. Do you think there'll be further calls?
Look, I think it'd be ignorant to think that the uranium mining ban in New South Wales won't hold up. I believe the legislation that was proposed, I should say, was less about uranium mining and more about accessing some of the substantial radioactive rare earth deposits out in New South Wales. There's no real known uranium deposit, large uranium deposits out in New South Wales at the moment. So I think that won't last. I mean, for example, they overturned the exploration ban on uranium mining in New South Wales back in 2012, I believe. So it's probably a matter of time before an actual mining ban on it. But that's not going to happen until you see government and corporate support trying to change the public narrative.
And you think that's coming?
I think it's some years away, but I think it's this decade we're going to see that change.
So if there's so would you say there's no real big appetite for nuclear power here, really, at the moment?
Not in Australia, but Lachie, you've got your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the uranium appetite around the world.
Yeah, so I've been looking at ASX listed uranium companies over the last 3 or 4 months, and there are a number of them out there, and they're all registering significant upticks. They're still at historically low prices, and that's as a result of the low spot price. But one of the companies in particular we follow on Exponential Stock Investor, they're projecting a uranium supply-demand deficit by about 2027. So there will eventually be this shift. It's just a matter of the timing of when you enter. So it's still very speculative to be involved with these ASX-listed uranium companies. And most of them actually don't have deposits in Australia. There are places like Namibia, even further afield places like, I think one of them is particularly focused on, gee, it escapes me, but there's a range of small ASX companies snapping up tenements in the US, and these are small cap explorers, and it all goes back to the US supply chain issue. So this has been a major political push in the US since Donald Trump's been president to, I guess, reverse the changes in its supply chain. So US production of uranium has fallen off a cliff in the last 2 years, and they're really looking at this as a strategic issue. So I think the US will be the driving factor behind the US a uranium spot price push up the charts.
On that, Lachie, before we go back to you, Woody, one of the reasons why the uranium mines all closed down in the US is because the price threshold fell below that US $60 per pound. And that's really where US mines need the price of uranium to be in order for those mines to be economical and profitable. But as Lachie just pointed out, there's some great small cap explorers around the world that are their share price is increasing because they've got uranium tenements. Here in Australia, we've actually got a substantial list, about 30 or 40 companies, tiny explorers, that have access to uranium on their tenements, but they just don't make a big deal of it. Now, it's partly because nobody wants to hear about it in the public right now, but also too, it's because it's not worth anything. If it's in places like New South Wales or Victoria or WA, it can't be mined. So there's no point talking up a deposit that's a bit of nickel alongside a little bit of uranium. They just focus on the nickel aspect of the story.
So you say there's not that much demand here, but do you think there's a big future in, say, for Aussie uranium miners to export it to other markets that are embracing nuclear power?
Well, I think China's the big one here, Shae. So I believe they've got 44 reactors and 12 under construction, and even more planned, and then even more proposed after that. So we know China's going extremely hard at uranium and nuclear power plants. And that will be, I mean, if it's good enough for China, it could be good enough for the rest of the world. The country is well known for loving efficiency, and I think China could be the leader here, in addition to the US and France, on the uranium front. So it's going to take a while, but eventually these ASX listed explorers will have a market to go to should the spot price continue to improve with increasing demand.
On that too, technology changes all the time, and what we know about nuclear reactor design is developing as well. So we've had a lot of things go wrong in a very short space of time. So I think as the demand for cleaner, more efficient energies changes over the next decade, the design of nuclear reactors is going to change, and I guess meet perhaps a higher standard in the future than we demand today. I'm not sure Australia's in a hurry to sell their uranium to China. That relationship looks like it's souring, but Lachie is 100% right in saying that the US will lead the way with what's happening with uranium and nuclear energy, and Australia will very much follow suit because they're an ally of ours, and we're not ready to, pick a fight with the biggest kid in the yard.
Hey,
well,
Shae,
there was one more thing I wanted to mention here, Woody, which is that
sure.
There was a Forbes article about, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago. The Democrats came out in favor of nuclear power for the first time in 48 years, and that's absolutely huge when you've got bipartisan support for an energy option. And I think, you combine that with what's happening with Bill Gates' TerraPower company and the evolving tech picture around nuclear. There's a confluence of factors here that's eventually going to lead to a potentially a uranium bull market run again. And it's very early days at this stage, and I want to stress that. But going forward, there's immense potential there, depending on which parts of the market you're most interested in.
I'm going to back Lachie up here and completely rip off a quote from Rick Rule. Just because it's inevitable doesn't mean it's imminent. So Lachie's right. Uranium is most definitely going to be facing a bull market at some point in the future, but I don't think it's going to happen immediately. We're talking a decade-long story here, because it's not about proving the technology. The technology's been proven, especially here in Australia. It's about convincing the public that this is the energy resource we need going forward. And Australia, as I said, is in an incredible position. I mean, we've got all the gold and all the uranium. That's an unbelievable advantage going into a very tetchy geopolitical backdrop.
And especially going into an environment where a clear global push and trend, not just with policymakers, but capital markets, towards a kind of cleaner energy future, really. And wouldn't you say, I mean, that's a long-term trend. So like you say, uranium's surely got to play its part in that.
It certainly does, and I'm at risk at hogging the airtime, but I tend to do that. Just something I wanted to point out.
You don't enjoy it, Shae.
Okay, I won't. Australia already does produce waste from uranium in the form of our dam tailings. So this is something that the public really does need to move forward from, is this idea of nuclear waste hurts our country. we're already mining the product. So the byproduct of uranium is already something we're managing, and we're doing that effectively. You don't hear any adverse reactions coming out of Olympic Dam. So this goes back to Lockie's point as well about PR. We need, if companies want to push the concept of uranium here, we need to point out to Australians that this is already happening. It's just time to take it to the next step, and that there's, certain safeguards that we can put in to minimize the environmental damage.
So let's just wrap up on where you guys see the biggest opportunity for investors right now who are keen to follow the nuclear story. Do you see the boom coming in the uranium market specifically, like the miners, the explorers, the producers, or are there any other companies that are related to that trend that you have your eyes on?
Well, I mean, I think I touched on this before, is that there's a brand new technology out there that we're focused on in EXS, which is a third generation uranium enrichment technology. Now, it's the same as these uranium mines in the sense that it needs the spot price to go up to a certain level in order for it to be economically viable. But it's potentially a tier 1 resource if this technology is used. So, I mean, it's very interesting, and I expect there'll be more uranium tech companies out there in the future. There's just one at the moment, but I think long term the overall picture is not now but soon.
Do you agree with that, Shae?
Yeah, look, I do. A slight addendum to that is I'm paying close attention to how the legislation around uranium changes around the country, because it's very much there is a push to control rare earths and processing of rare earths on Australian soil, and we actually don't do a lot of that now. And as the legislation changes around the rare earth sector, we're going to see that open the pathway for uranium, because a lot of rare earths are actually radioactive products. So for me, the catalyst to moving more into Australian-based stocks with access to uranium deposits, it will come in the changes that happen to rare earths and allowing processing of many rare earths on Australian soil.
Okay, right. Cheers, Shae. Lachie. I think we'll leave it there for today. Thanks for sharing your insight with us. I think nuclear power is pretty clear. It's got to be part of this clean energy conversation. Whether there'll be a demand for it here at home remains to be seen, but we certainly have enough uranium resources to supply overseas markets that decide to go down this route. And that will undoubtedly provide some exciting opportunities to investors. So thanks again for giving us your take.
Thanks, Woody. Thanks, Lachie. Cheers,
Woody. Cheers, Shae.
Now, for those watching at home, again, for a limited time, you can join us for the Beyond Oil online conference for free. So simply scroll down, type your email address into the box below this video and click or tap the button. We're only offering free tickets for a limited time. So if you're interested in what we've been talking about these past few days, and if you want to get some clean energy investment ideas for your portfolio, get your name down today and I will send you a free ticket. So thanks again for your time, and I'll see you again soon.